June 1944. The fields of Normandy burned beneath the thunder of armor. From a ridge near St. El, German tank commander Hauptmann Erich Boltenhagen peered through his binoculars, his Tiger's barrel glinting in the pale light. Below, the horizon moved, not with men, but with machines. Dozens, then hundreds of Shermans, rolling forward through hedgerows and craters, their olive-drab hulls smeared with mud and dust. Only a year earlier, German officers had mocked these American tanks, calling them Tommy Cookers for how easily they burned. But now, laughter had given way to silence. The Tiger crews had just 12 shells left. Their engines strained. The radio crackled with static. For every Tiger they destroyed, 10 Shermans replaced it within hours. The sky above was alive with Allied aircraft, circling like hawks. The battlefield no longer belonged to the elite. It belonged to those who could endure. Inside one Sherman, a young U.S. gunner loaded another shell, whispering a prayer. Around him, the ground trembled with the sound of endless steel. This was no longer a duel of machines. It was a storm of industry, a clash between perfection and production. And in that storm, the Tiger's roar began to fade. When war broke out in September 1939, the world witnessed a new form of lightning war. Blitzkrieg. Lightning war combined speed, coordination, and concentrated armor in ways no army had yet mastered. German panzer divisions, sleek and disciplined, tore through Poland and then France with a precision that stunned the world. In a matter of weeks, once proud nations fell under a storm of steel and fire. The Panzer I and II were lightly armed, but their strength came from doctrine, not thickness of armor. German officers like Heinz Guderian understood tanks as mobile spearheads, striking fast, bypassing resistance, and letting infantry and artillery clean up what remained. They moved as a single organism, guided by radio communication and flexible command structures. The Allies still treated tanks as infantry support. Germany saw them as the future. By 1941, that doctrine had matured. The invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, unleashed more than 3,000 German tanks across the Eastern Front. Yet there, amid the vast plains of Russia, German crews met their first real challenge. The Soviet T-34, with its sloped armor, wide tracks, and powerful 76 mm gun, could survive hits that shredded older panzers. It was a shock to the German armored corps, a glimpse that supremacy could vanish overnight. Hitler's response was swift and emotional. He demanded a tank that could crush any enemy vehicle on Earth, one that would restore the image of invincibility. From that order emerged the Panzerkampfwagen V Tiger. It was a marvel of engineering, 57 tons of steel and 88 mm gun capable of destroying a Sherman from over a mile away, and armor so thick that Allied shells often bounced off harmlessly. When the Tiger appeared in 1942, it embodied German industrial ambition, craftsmanship forged into a weapon. Across the Atlantic, the United States was still finding its footing. Before Pearl Harbor, its tank program was modest, rooted in pre-war ideas of mobility, not heavy combat. The U.S. Army had built a handful of light and medium tanks like the M2 and early M3 Lee, but these designs were awkward, tall, and undergunned. American doctrine saw tanks as tools for exploitation, to move fast after the enemy line broke, not to duel head-on with armor. Few in Washington understood what the coming war would demand. The Germans had learned to let their tanks fight tanks. The Americans still believed the anti-tank gun and air support would handle that task. It was a gap in thinking that would soon cost lives. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, its tank force was largely untested. The men who would become famous names, like Creighton Abrams or Lafayette Poole, were still training in dusty camps across Georgia and California, learning on machines that already looked outdated compared to German panzers. But America possessed something Germany did not: the world's largest industrial base, and the will to turn it toward war. Factories that once built cars, farm equipment, and locomotives would soon be producing tanks by the thousands. Yet in 1942, that transformation was still beginning. On the battlefields of North Africa, American armor was about to face the reality of modern war for the first time, and the laughter from German officers would soon follow. For the Wehrmacht, the desert was another stage for its superiority. Panzer III and IV divisions moved with brutal precision under commanders like Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. Against them came the inexperienced U.S. Sioux Corps armed with M3 Lees and the first early model Shermans. They were brave men, but untested, their tactics raw, their communication systems crude. At Kasserine Pass in early 1943, the difference was mercilessly exposed. German tank crews, seasoned from years of war, picked off American machines with surgical accuracy. The U.S. formations broke and retreated. In Berlin, reports of the battle reinforced a growing arrogance among German officers. They saw the American tankers as amateurs, reckless, mechanical imitators of British style, with no understanding of real armored warfare. One German report from the Afrika Korps described U.S. armor as brave, but blind. Another, circulated among Panzer divisions, joked that Shermans burn as brightly as the desert sun. That laughter would echo for only a short while. Because behind those early losses, something larger was taking shape. A machine that would not just fight, but produce, learn, and return stronger with every month. And its symbol would be a tank, the M4 Sherman. The M4 Sherman was not born to be perfect. It was born to be everywhere. In 1941, as America watched Europe burn, the U.S. Ordnance Department faced a critical question. What kind of tank could be built fast, shipped anywhere, and maintained by ordinary soldiers? The answer came not from a single genius, but from collective practicality. A design forged by necessity. The Sherman's shape was simple welded or cast hull, a medium 75 mm gun, a reliable Continental or Ford engine, and wide tracks capable of handling mud, snow, and sand. It was not heavily armored, nor exceptionally armed. But it was balanced, the middle ground, between speed, protection, and production. Its suspension could handle long drives, its engine ran for hundreds of hours without failure, and its parts could be swapped out like components of a car. To the men who built it, this tank represented something larger than firepower. It represented the idea that reliability wins wars. By late 1942, as American forces landed in North Africa, the first Shermans rolled off ships onto the Algerian coast. Painted in olive drab, their crews, often barely trained, climbed inside with nervous excitement. The Germans watching through binoculars saw something else, a tank that looked tall, clumsy, and easy to spot. At Kasserine Pass, many of those Shermans met their end within hours. German 88 mm guns punched through them effortlessly. The myth of the invincible tiger was beginning to form. Allied reports recorded entire platoons of Shermans knocked out in a single engagement, black smoke rising into the desert sky. In Berlin, the propaganda machine turned those victories into legend. Articles in Die Wehrmacht magazine boasted that the new American tanks were thinly armored coffins. Even experienced panzer commanders viewed them with disdain. They believed the Americans lacked not only experience but imagination, that they built tanks as they built cars in quantity, not quality. And yet, the story was more complex. For every Sherman that burned, data was collected, lessons were learned, and factories back home adjusted designs in weeks, not months. By mid-1943, new models featured better armor, improved transmissions, and the faster 76 mm gun. Crews were trained more rigorously, tactics evolved rapidly. Commanders began coordinating with artillery and air support, developing the concept of the combined arms team. Tanks, infantry, and aircraft fighting as one. The Tiger was still the stronger tank. But it was also fragile. Its engine prone to overheating, its mechanical parts requiring hours of maintenance for every few miles of movement. Germany could only build a few dozen each month. The United States, meanwhile, was producing more than 1,000 Shermans every 30 days. In Detroit, Lima, and Grand Blanc, entire factories were dedicated solely to one purpose: building more. Workers, men and women, worked around the clock under banners that read, "We're building a tank every hour." America's strength was not in the individual machine, but in the unstoppable rhythm of production. By the time U.S. forces returned to Europe in 1944, they came with an army of Shermans. The tank had become a global symbol, deployed in the Pacific, Italy, and across the fields of France. Its very name carried weight among Allied troops, a dependable partner, even if not the strongest. German officers, however, still laughed. They mocked the Sherman's thin armor and gasoline engine. They pointed to kill ratios and saw proof of superiority. But they were missing the broader reality, one that no single Tiger could ever defeat. For every German tank that rolled off the line, 10 Shermans followed. For every destroyed Sherman, another was already on a ship, crossing the Atlantic. The war of machines had become a war of factories, and no amount of precision craftsmanship could outbuild an empire of assembly lines. In the quiet of command rooms from Berlin to Normandy, German planners began to notice the numbers. Intelligence reports warned of endless shipments from America: tanks, fuel, spare parts, and ammunition stockpiles larger than the Wehrmacht's total reserves. Some officers dismissed them as exaggeration. Others, quietly, began to worry. Because wars are not decided only by steel and armor, but by who can keep fighting when everything else runs out. And soon, those Shermans would prove it. Not through perfection, but through persistence. In war, every weapon tells the story of the nation that built it. The Tiger and the Sherman were more than tanks. They were two civilizations cast in steel. To German designers, a tank was a masterpiece. Every Tiger that left the Henschel factory was hand-assembled, its components machined to microscopic tolerances. Its 88 mm gun could destroy a Sherman before the American crew ever saw it. Its thick armor, up to 120 mm at the front, made it almost impervious in direct combat. On paper, the Tiger was unmatched, but perfection came at a price. The Tiger required nearly 300,000 labor hours to build. Each part was unique, each machine a slightly different creature that demanded individual care. The complex transmission could seize under strain, its final drives often failed in rough terrain. Fuel consumption was enormous, 3 gallons per mile, and spare parts were scarce. In muddy or snowy conditions, a broken track could immobilize the tank for days. German mechanics respected the Tiger, but feared it too. It was a predator that often trapped itself. The Sherman, by contrast, was the opposite philosophy. American engineers designed it not for glory, but for repetition. It could be assembled in multiple factories, using interchangeable parts that fit any model. Its engines, radial aircraft engines, diesels, or the Ford V8, could be swapped in hours. A single maintenance crew could keep dozens running with a few crates of tools. This simplicity gave birth to something extraordinary: consistency. Every Sherman behaved like the last. Crews could jump from one to another and feel instantly at home. Mechanics didn't need manuals. They learned by muscle memory. In a war where logistics decided survival, that uniformity was power. German engineers scoffed at this approach, calling it crude mass production. Yet it was exactly what the Allies needed. A Sherman that ran today mattered more than a Tiger that broke down tomorrow. By mid-1944, Tiger battalions were often fighting at half strength. Many tanks lost not to battle but to mechanical failure or fuel shortages. Meanwhile, U.S. armored divisions rolled forward with full complements, their losses replaced almost overnight. The battlefield no longer rewarded the most perfect design. It rewarded the one that kept moving. If the Tiger represented Germany's obsession with craftsmanship, the Sherman embodied America's faith in industry. In 1940, before the United States entered the war, President Roosevelt called for the production of 50,000 tanks. At the time, that number sounded impossible. The country barely had the facilities or the expertise. But Detroit, the Motor City, answered. Auto plants were retooled overnight. The Chrysler Arsenal tank plant became a marvel of wartime engineering, turning out one completed Sherman every 38 minutes by 1943. Assembly lines ran 24 hours a day, powered by millions of civilian workers, mechanics, welders, and countless women who joined the workforce for the first time. Each shift brought thousands of identical components, stamped, tested, and shipped across the nation. Trains carried them to ports, convoys carried them to war. Germany, under constant Allied bombing and material shortage, could never match that rhythm. Even when new designs like the Panther and King Tiger entered service, their complexity slowed everything down. Each tank demanded scarce tungsten, copper, and skilled labor, resources that the collapsing Reich could no longer provide. By contrast, the United States treated tanks like ammunition, expendable, replaceable, endlessly supplied. In 1944 alone, American factories produced over 17,000 Shermans. Germany managed fewer than 400 Tigers in the entire war. This imbalance created a new kind of warfare. While German commanders relied on superior range and armor, American generals planned battles around replacement rates and logistics. They knew that even if losses were high, the flow would not stop. Reinforcements would always arrive. Numbers became a weapon of their own. Historians often debate whether the Sherman was good enough. Its armor was thinner, its gun less powerful, and its silhouette tall. But its true strength lay not in any single statistic, it was in the system surrounding it. The Sherman was a part of a machine far larger than itself, an industrial, logistical, and tactical ecosystem that moved with mechanical precision. Germany built weapons of awe. America built an army of momentum. Even German soldiers began to notice. A captured Panzer officer reportedly told his interrogators in 1944, "For every tank we destroy, 3 more take its place before dusk." To them, it seemed less like fighting an army and more like fighting an endless tide. That tide had no arrogance, no grandeur. It simply advanced. Relentlessly, methodically, irresistibly. And soon, the human stories inside those steel shells would reveal why numbers alone were not the full explanation. Behind every Sherman was a crew, young, determined, often terrified, whose courage made those numbers mean something. Inside every Sherman, 4 or 5 men lived, fought, and sometimes died together. The gunner, eyes fixed to a periscope. The loader, hands raw from heaving 75mm shells. The driver, sweating under the constant vibration of the engine. And the commander, the one who had to keep them calm when the armor around them began to scream under impact. Most were barely in their 20s. Few had ever seen Europe before stepping onto the beaches of Normandy or the sands of Tunisia. Training camps in Kentucky and Texas had tried to prepare them, but no manual could capture what it meant to face a Tiger head-on. The first time many tankers saw one, it looked like a monster from another world. Its barrel longer, its armor thicker, its gun thunderous enough to shake the ground. But they fought anyway. For the crews, survival depended not on armor, but on cooperation. They learned to use their speed, to flank rather than charge, to call in artillery or air strikes when needed. Tank commanders became masters of improvisation, using smoke screens, quick turns, and terrain to their advantage. A single Tiger could destroy several Shermans, but a coordinated platoon could surround it, forcing its slow turret to chase multiple targets. The Sherman's agility and communication systems, radios in every tank, gave American crews flexibility. In contrast, Many German units still relied on hand signals or shouting through open hatches. It was a deadly game of chess played at 40 tons apiece. And in that game, teamwork began to close the gap that technology had opened. One veteran, Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole, nicknamed War Daddy, destroyed over 250 enemy vehicles in his Sherman, often under heavy fire. He once said, "We weren't the biggest, but we were always moving, and the ones who kept moving lived." For the men inside, the Sherman became more than a machine. It was home, protection, and identity. They gave their tanks names in the mood: Thunderbolt, Battling Basic. Some painted lucky symbols on the turrets, others carried small tokens from home. Photographs, letters, small Bible verses taped near the gun sight. Each time a shell hit, they felt it like a heartbeat skipping. Each time they survived, it felt like a miracle. By late 1943, American commanders had learned a crucial lesson: the Sherman could not win through direct duels alone. The battlefield had to be shaped to its strengths. Tactics evolved. Infantry and armor began to move as a single organism. Shermans would advance with infantry close behind, covering their flanks and spotting hidden anti-tank guns. In return, tanks provided fire support and broke through strongpoints. Above them, Allied fighter bombers, P-47 Thunderbolts and Typhoons, patrolled the skies, ready to strike German armor exposed on the move. This integration transformed the way battles were fought. Where German units often relied on isolated tank formations, the Americans turned combined arms into an art form. A single tank battalion could now call in artillery within minutes, coordinate with aircraft through radio, and resupply overnight from immense logistical trains. The Sherman became a cog in a much larger, synchronized war machine, one where speed, coordination, and communication mattered more than raw firepower. German commanders, trained in the traditions of armored spearheads, struggled to adapt to this industrial symphony. They were still fighting tactical battles. The Americans were waging operational war. Even where Tigers and Panthers destroyed dozens of Shermans, they could not hold ground for long. Each German victory was swallowed by an avalanche of replacements. Every burned-out hull was soon replaced by 3 fresh tanks the next morning. By D-Day, Allied armored doctrine was mature, refined through blood and repetition. The Shermans moved in formations like flowing water, supported by engineers clearing mines, by air reconnaissance, mapping targets, and by logistics units bringing endless fuel and ammunition. The Tiger remained a fearsome opponent, but the tide had shifted. The battlefield now favored those who could move, coordinate, and sustain. For German tank crews, 1944 brought an unfamiliar feeling: exhaustion. Reports from Normandy described endless waves of Shermans, more than they could count. One German officer wrote, "We destroy them in dozens, but they return in hundreds." The pride once associated with commanding a Tiger began to feel like a burden. Each machine was irreplaceable, every breakdown a small disaster. Panzer divisions that began campaigns with 120 tanks often ended with fewer than 20 still operational. Not because of combat alone, but because of fuel, spare parts, and relentless Allied bombing of supply lines. In conversations recorded by Allied intelligence, captured German officers admitted a grim truth: the American tank is inferior only until you meet 10 of them. Even the Tiger's aura began to fade. Its mechanical failures, its limited numbers, and the growing Allied air dominance made it a hunted beast. Crews began camouflaging their tanks under trees, moving only at night. Every time a Tiger rolled out, Allied aircraft marked it for destruction. The laughter that once greeted American armor now gave way to silence. A silence filled with the sound of engines that never stopped. The war had entered a new phase, one where German confidence eroded and American persistence defined the rhythm of battle. Every destroyed Tiger became a symbol, every advancing Sherman a reminder that the balance of power had shifted from craftsmanship to capacity. And soon, this shift would erupt into its defining moment, the battles of 1944, where the two philosophies collided head-on in the hedgerows and open fields of France. June 6, 1944. At dawn, the Channel thundered with the greatest armada ever assembled. Operation Overlord had begun. On the beaches of Normandy, thousands of Allied soldiers fought to carve out a foothold in Fortress Europe. Behind them, waiting on the ships, were the machines that would carry the war inland, the M4 Shermans. Within days, hundreds rolled ashore, engines roaring, treads biting into wet sand. They came in endless lines, waterproofed, reinforced, some fitted with deep, waiting gear and flotation screens. To the German defenders watching from the cliffs, it was an impossible sight, the horizon filled with metal. For years they had been told that no army could reach them. Now, it was happening. As the Allies pushed beyond the beaches into the hedgerow country of Normandy, tank warfare entered one of its most brutal phases. The landscape was a maze. Narrow lanes, high earthen walls, and hidden ambush points. German Tiger and Panther tanks waited in silence, their crews patient, trained, and deadly. The first Shermans that advanced through those bocage fields suffered terribly. German gunners knew every turn, every choke point. An 88mm shell could pierce a Sherman's front armor like paper. American crews quickly realized that the tactics that worked in North Africa meant nothing here. Entire platoons vanished in minutes. In some units, losses reached 50% within a single day. German commanders sent reports to Berlin boasting of massacres of Allied armor. The confidence of the Panzer divisions, temporarily at least, seemed restored. But behind the chaos, adaptation began. American engineers studied the terrain and invented solutions on the spot. One officer, Sergeant Curtis G. Cullen, famously welded pieces of German obstacles onto the front of a Sherman to cut through the hedgerows, the Rano device. Within days, hundreds of tanks were equipped with them. The bocage, once the Germans' greatest advantage, began to crumble. Air power joined the fight. P-47 Thunderbolts and Typhoon fighter bombers swooped low, launching rockets and bombs that shattered Tiger positions. The Germans began to lose their most irreplaceable machines, not in tank duels, but to the skies. By late July, the Allies prepared for Operation Cobra, the breakout that would decide Normandy's fate. The plan D: saturate the German front lines with thousands of bombers, then send the armored divisions charging through the gap. When the bombing began on July 25, 1944, it was as if the earth itself was ending. Entire panzer regiments vanished under the firestorm. The surviving Tigers, blinded by dust and smoke, tried to hold the line. But what followed was unlike anything they had faced before. Endless Shermans, moving fast, in coordination, with air cover above and artillery behind. Each one supported by another. When one was hit, two more took its place. The battlefield became a blur of motion, green steel surging through smoke. For the first time, German tankers realized that destruction could not keep pace with replacement. They would destroy a dozen Shermans, only to face twice as many by nightfall. In the village of St. L, wrecks of both sides littered the roads. American engineers worked through the night to clear paths, while fuel convoys rolled in under cover of darkness. Every morning, the columns resumed their advance. The Wehrmacht was bleeding, not just in men and machines, but in time. The one resource it could not rebuild. Among German units, whispers spread that even victory in battle no longer mattered. One Tiger commander noted bitterly, "What can destroy them all day, but the sky delivers more." The German advantage, range, accuracy, armor, had lost its meaning. By early August, the Allied armored divisions had broken through. The once stable German line fractured into chaos. The U.S. First and Third Armies poured through the breach. encircling entire panzer groups in what became the Falaise Pocket. It was here that the myth of German invincibility finally began to collapse. From the air, pilots described the scene as a graveyard of steel. Dozens of wrecked Tigers lay along the roads, their engines torn out, crews either captured or dead. What had once been a symbol of dominance now lay smoking in the mud, monuments to an empire outbuilt and outlasted. The Allies had learned, adapted, and overwhelmed. The Tiger's roar still echoed, but the flood of Shermans drowned it out. The laughter that had once filled German barracks in Tunisia and Sicily was gone. Now, silence, and the realization that the war of machines had turned against them. The tide of war had shifted permanently. Yet, even as the German armies retreated from Normandy, a final test awaited. The last desperate counterattacks, the final stands of the Panzer divisions trying to halt the unstoppable Allied advance toward Germany itself. By mid-August 1944, the once formidable German armored divisions were in retreat. Normandy's bocage had been shattered, Saint-El captured, and the road to Paris open. Shermans poured through the countryside, engines thundering, trees gouging furrows into the wet earth. Every mile marked a reversal in the war of tanks, quantity overcoming quality, coordination overcoming arrogance. The German Panzer divisions, proud of their Tigers and Panthers, found themselves in constant flight. Fuel shortages forced entire units to abandon their most advanced machines. Maintenance crews worked desperately, but the pace was unsustainable. Captured logs revealed that many Tigers were immobilized before even reaching the battlefield. Victims not of combat, but of logistics. On August 19, the Allies liberated Paris. Shermans rolled down its boulevards alongside cheering civilians. Yet for American tank crews, the war was far from over. Intelligence reported pockets of German armor regrouping near the Seine, planning counterattacks with the few remaining Tigers. The Germans hoped to delay the advance, but the sheer number of Shermans and accompanying infantry rendered these plans futile. One notable engagement unfolded near Le Mans. A small Tiger company, confident in its superiority, attempted to halt the Sherman advance along the main highway. They destroyed a dozen Shermans in quick succession, but American reinforcements arrived almost immediately. Artillery and air strikes softened their positions, while Sherman platoons flanked the heavy tanks. Within hours, the Tigers were either destroyed, abandoned, or captured. The psychological impact on German commanders was profound. Reports from the front describe officers pacing command posts late at night, realizing that no tactical maneuver could compensate for the overwhelming Allied production. Even if we fight perfectly, one officer noted, the Americans will never stop coming. This realization crystallized during the Falaise Pocket encirclement in late August. Thousands of German troops, along with hundreds of tanks, including remaining Tigers, were trapped. The Tigers, symbols of German engineering brilliance, were unable to lead a breakout. One by one, they were destroyed by Sherman's squads, artillery, and relentless air strikes. By the time the pocket was closed, nearly 50 Zauser German soldiers were captured or killed, and a significant portion of their remaining armored force was lost. The ratio of surviving Tigers to destroyed Shermans was no longer favorable. It became emblematic of a broader truth: German quality could not overcome Allied quantity. The German High Command, long confident in the Tiger as a game changer, now faced a stark reality. The Allies were winning not by individual brilliance on the battlefield, but by sustained pressure, logistical superiority, and the relentless replacement of losses. One officer's diary entry reflects this shift. We have feared the Americans' lack of experience, yet their persistence terrifies me more than our guns ever could. As September approached, Allied forces advanced across northern France and into the Low Countries. Sherman units moved with speed and coordination, supported by artillery and aircraft. often encountering Tiger units that were few, wary, and outnumbered. The machine that once evoked mockery now commanded the battlefield by virtue of its numbers and adaptability. The contrast was stark. Tigers, designed to dominate through precision, now struggled to survive. Shermans, built for endurance, adapted and multiplied. German crews who had laughed at American tanks in Tunisia and Sicily were now fighting a war they could not win. Not because they lacked skill, but because the system behind their enemy was unstoppable. By late 1944, the American Sherman had achieved a psychological as well as physical victory. German commanders began issuing reports acknowledging what they had long denied: no single Tiger could stem the tide of American production and strategy. The arrogance of early campaigns, the laughter at the supposed inferior Sherman, had been replaced by a sober recognition of industrial inevitability. The battlefields of France bore witness to this shift. Wrecked Tigers, once feared by every Allied tank crew, lay alongside burned-out Shermans. Yet the survivors were overwhelmingly American. Roads, villages, and fields bore the scars of relentless armored advance, a testament to the fact that warfare had become a contest not just of weapons, but of production, logistics, and endurance. By the time the Allies crossed into Germany in late 1944, the story was clear. The Tiger remained formidable, but it was no longer decisive. Sherman after Sherman continued to roll forward, their crews hardened by experience, their supply lines unbroken, their replacements constant. The war had evolved. Industrial might and coordinated tactics had eclipsed raw battlefield superiority. The Germans had faced the unimaginable, their greatest weapon, the Tiger, humbled not by firepower alone, but by a flood of Shermans whose relentless advance redefined the nature of armored warfare. The echo of laughter had vanished, replaced by quiet fear and strategic despair, and with that, the stage was set for the final destruction of German armored forces. A closing act that would seal the fate of the Third Reich's tanks and leave an indelible mark on the history of mechanized war. By late 1944, the battlefields of Western Europe bore the scars of relentless armored conflict. Hedgerows were flattened, roads littered with the remnants of tanks, and villages bore the marks of constant shelling. Yet the broader picture told a story that went far beyond the immediate destruction. A shift in the balance of power driven by industry, logistics, and unyielding persistence. The German Panzer divisions had fought with skill and determination. Their Tigers and Panthers were engineering marvels, capable of striking fear into inexperienced crews. But even these formidable machines could not compensate for dwindling numbers, overstretched supply lines, and constant attrition. In Normandy alone, German reports estimate that over 250 Tigers were deployed. Fewer than half remained operational by the time the Allies broke out of the hedgerows in August. Many were abandoned due to mechanical failure or fuel shortages, highlighting the fragility of even the most advanced designs when faced with relentless pressure. The U.S. armored forces, in contrast, exemplified the strategic power of mass production. By D-Day, nearly 500 Shermans were available to the Allies. Within weeks, replacements ensured that even high losses did not slow the advance. Combined with superior logistics, continuous supply of fuel, ammunition, and spare parts, the Sherman's presence on the battlefield was constant and unyielding. Where a Tiger could dominate for hours, the Shermans dominated by sheer persistence. The psychological impact on German commanders was profound. Reports from the front describe officers noting that tactical victories no longer translated into strategic advantage. Even when a Tiger company destroyed multiple Shermans, another dozen would arrive before nightfall. The terror once associated with a single Tiger had transformed into a grim realization. Numbers, coordination, and endurance now dictated the battlefield. From an operational perspective, the Americans had also refined their approach. combined arms doctrine, integrating tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support, turned each Sherman into more than a vehicle. It became a node in a network of constant offensive pressure. German units, increasingly outnumbered and under constant aerial observation, found themselves reacting rather than dictating. Casualty figures underscore the shift. Across the Normandy campaign, estimates suggest that nearly 4,000 Shermans were lost, while German armored losses exceeded 2,000 tanks, including Tigers, Panthers, and Panzer IVs. While the Tigers inflicted heavy damage, the loss ratio favored the Allies in both material and operational capacity. Each destroyed Sherman was quickly replaced, while German production could not match these numbers. The broader consequence was clear: Germany's armored strategy, once built on quality and battlefield superiority, had become unsustainable. Allied industrial capacity, training, and logistics created an environment in which even the most feared weapons could not secure victory. The Sherman, once dismissed as inferior, had proven decisive, not through technical perfection, but through unrelenting presence, adaptability, and the human ingenuity of its crews. By September 1944, the German High Command faced a grim reality. The Western Front was collapsing. Panthers and Tigers could no longer stem the tide. Sherman-led formations continued to push across northern France, liberating towns and cities, and steadily moving toward Germany. Strategic planners recognized that the war's outcome was increasingly tied to the industrial and logistical superiority that the United States had brought to the battlefield. In essence, the Sherman had changed the calculus of armored warfare. The era in which a single tank, no matter how advanced, could dictate the battlefield was over. In its place was a new paradigm: the combined might of production, coordination, and human resilience, demonstrating that even the most feared machines could be overwhelmed when outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The battlefield had spoken. The Tiger roared, but the Sherman endured. The destruction of German armored forces in Normandy and the subsequent advance across France marked a turning point not only in the war, but in the philosophy of armored warfare. The Tiger, long seen as the ultimate battlefield predator, was revealed to be a tactical marvel constrained by industrial limits. The Sherman, by contrast, exemplified a new kind of power, one rooted not in individual dominance, but in sustainability, coordination, and sheer numbers. Strategically, the Allies now held the initiative. German forces could no longer mount large-scale counterattacks with concentrated armor. Even elite divisions were reduced to fragmented defensive actions, scrambling to delay the inevitable. The Falaise Pocket had destroyed a significant portion of the Wehrmacht's remaining Panzer divisions, and the loss of experienced crews further eroded effectiveness. Each Tiger that fell was irreplaceable. Each Sherman destroyed could be replaced within days. The impact on German tank design and doctrine was profound. The Panther and Tiger II, while technologically advanced, were costly and time-consuming to produce. The Reichsfactories could only produce a fraction of what the United States could. Even when the Germans attempted to concentrate their remaining armor for decisive counterattacks, the imbalance in numbers and logistical support made such efforts futile. Operational success required more than individual superiority. It required endurance, coordination, and supply, areas where the Allies now excelled. For American forces, the lessons of the Normandy campaign reinforced the value of adaptability and industrial scale. Tactics evolved as crews learned to exploit Sherman's strengths: mobility, reliability, and coordination with infantry and air support. Vehicles like the Rhino Sherman, fitted with hedgerow-cutting devices, demonstrated how innovation in the field could overcome initial design limitations. The Sherman became a symbol of practical warfare, resilient, replaceable, and versatile. Beyond the battlefield, the psychological effect was unmistakable. German commanders, who had once ridiculed American tanks, now acknowledged their fear of the Shermans' relentlessness. One officer, reflecting on the campaign in a captured diary, wrote, "The Americans have understood a principle. We cannot counter, they are everywhere, and they never stop coming." This shift in perception marked a critical moment in the collapse of German confidence. An intangible yet decisive factor in warfare. By late 1944, as Sherman led forces crossed into Germany, the pattern was clear. Individual technological superiority could no longer guarantee battlefield success. Instead, the integration of human skill, tactical innovation, and industrial capacity dictated outcomes. The Tiger's legend persisted, but its practical influence was declining rapidly. German efforts became defensive, reactive, and ultimately unsustainable. The Normandy campaign and subsequent advances demonstrated that war was no longer a duel between the best tanks, but a contest of systems. Supply chains training, coordination, and sheer production numbers had become the decisive weapons. In this context, the Sherman, humble, mechanically reliable, and endlessly replaced, was the instrument of Allied victory. By the time the Allies reached the Rhine in early 1945, the narrative was undeniable: Germany's armored might, while awe-inspiring in isolation, could not match the relentless momentum of American industrial and tactical efficiency. The battlefield had transformed, and with it, the very concept of armored warfare. The Sherman had survived the Tigers, not because it was stronger or more advanced, but because it embodied a philosophy of endurance over brilliance. It became a testament to the idea that persistence, logistics, and human ingenuity often outweigh individual perfection, a lesson that reshaped military thinking for decades to come. The War of Steel had been won not by fearsome predators, but by the steady, unyielding flood of American armor. The story of the Sherman and the Tiger is not simply a tale of machines. It is a story of philosophy, industry, and human endurance. One tank was crafted as a masterpiece, precise, powerful, awe-inspiring. The other was designed to endure, reliable, replaceable, and relentless. In the end, it was the latter that reshaped the course of history. In the fields of Normandy, the Tigers roared with technical brilliance, but the Shermans arrived in waves, never ceasing, their engines echoing a truth that no single weapon could contradict: war favors persistence over perfection. For the soldiers inside, survival depended on courage, coordination, and ingenuity. For the nations behind them, victory depended on factories, logistics, and unyielding determination. The clash of these philosophies left lasting lessons. Germany's finest designs were limited by production and resources. America's seemingly inferior tank triumphed because it was part of a system that could sustain losses, innovate in the field, and leverage industrial might. The Sherman proved that scale, adaptability, and human skill could overcome even the most formidable adversaries. For historians, the Normandy campaign offers more than numbers and battles. It reveals how technology, strategy, and humanity intersect in war. It reminds us that bravery alone cannot overcome systemic imbalance, and that ingenuity can transform apparent weakness into decisive strength. And for those who look at the battlefield today, silent and scattered with wreckage, the lesson is clear: the roar of a single Tiger may inspire fear, but the unbroken advance of countless Shermans defines destiny. In the end, endurance outlasts arrogance, and persistence writes history. The Tiger may have symbolized fear, and the Sherman pragmatism. Yet it was the Sherman, humble, resolute, and inexhaustible, that carried the Allies across Europe, proving that wars are often won not by the mightiest machine, but by the unrelenting force of people, production, and purpose.